Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video I'll be talking about my experience doing something that I've been wanting to do for a while now. I mean, a lot of people have been recommending that I start watching The Challenge, and it's a show that has been very intimidating to me. I've always planned on eventually getting into it, but here we're finally going to be talking about my experience watching the first few seasons of the show I have ever watched. Now again, I always plan on covering the show at some point. It's just that, again, there's so many seasons, and with the cast of this show being comprised of returning players for the most part every season, and also those returning players also stemming from other shows that I more than likely haven't watched. Again, it just felt like a really daunting task to start here. But more recently, with the inclusion of Big Brother and Survivor players, I've definitely been more incentivized to watch the series. But again, I just really struggled with figuring out how I wanted to do so. Current season is The Challenge Double Agents, and when that season started and there was hype around that kind of got me to really just say, screw it, let's do it. Let's start watching the show. But the problem there is just where to start. I mean, obviously my initial inkling is to start from the beginning and go through the full history of the show, but there's a problem in that inherently in the fact that season 1 is a radically different show. I mean, seasons 1 through 4, from what I understand, have a radically different format and also has a radically different cast from what we would see nowadays. I mean, I believe none of the people from those seasons still compete on current seasons of The Challenge. Plus also, I mean, they're not the easiest seasons to find in full, and really this goes for a lot of the earlier seasons of the show, but at the same time I didn't really want to watch a newer season either, because I feel like I wanted to get context on some of these legendary figures of the show that have been competing for a while. So I decided to go for a happy medium there. Season 12, Fresh Meat. And I started watching that season. Immediately after I started watching that, I found out that seasons 10 and 13, the Inferno II and the Duel respectively, have been put onto Netflix, which is obviously a really easy way to access those seasons, and decided to proceed by watching those. And with that being seasons 10, 12, and 13, I decided to fill in that gap in those block of seasons by watching season 11 as well. Now, obviously, the plan as a whole is to catch up with the entire series, but I decided with this block of earlier seasons out of the way, I might as well stop here and talk about my opinions on the series so far. So let's just run through my experience with the show and just talk about my general thoughts as we go along. So instead of chronological order here of when the seasons aired, we're going to be talking about them in the order that I watched the season. So we're going to be starting off here with Fresh Meat, season 12, which coming into the season, I will admit, I misunderstood the twist. I thought Fresh Meat would have been an entire cast of rookies, and that was another one of the reasons why I was more incentivized to start here. However, it turns out that only half the cast is newbies, while the other half are vets. And I was a bit hesitant when I first saw this, obviously, as again, I don't know anything pretty much about the real world or road rules, and I do still find it strange how this show assumes that you know about these different seasons. Obviously there's points where they do flashbacks, but for the most part, the show doesn't really give you much context on the relationships of these former players, both on The Challenge and on their original shows. But again, with how many outside relationships there are on the show, plus also how they affect the game, I wasn't feeling great about this season early on. But after a few episodes, I definitely started to get a bit more invested. Now, something I found out after watching the season was that this was the first season of the show to not be played in massive teams. Instead, this season is played in duos of one rookie and one vet, and instantly we see the real-world Austin cast get targeted right away. And I did find it weird how 4 out of the 12 vets were from one specific cast, and also that cast being the latest real world cast and have never actually been on The Challenge before. So again, it was just kind of weird they were considered vets. And I felt like that inherently gave them a massive disadvantage coming into this. And they end up going one by one, and this got really predictable. But the one person that makes this section of the season and really is the star of the season as a whole, and even to this day is still one of the biggest stars of the show, is Wes Bergman. I've heard of Wes before this season. I mean, this is the thing also, is that I know a good chunk about The Challenge. While I haven't watched any seasons before this, I know a good chunk about the modern seasons of the show, especially in terms of placements. I know the winners of the recent seasons. I know about some of the legacies of some of these bigger players, at least from a general sense. So I'm not coming into this completely blind. And Wes was someone I've definitely heard of before as one of the strategic masterminds of the show. And on this season, he really comes off as this really cocky asshole really early on, especially when it comes to his relationship with his girlfriend, Johanna, and them arguing pretty much every episode. Again, he does not have a great look there. But really, in many ways, he reminded me of what I thought Spencer Bledsoe from Survivor Cagayan was going to be before that season. To be honest, they even have like kind of a similar type of voice. So like every single time I would see Wes on screen, I was just kind of thinking of Spencer. But he really does make this season, as a lot of the drama revolving this season stems from him. I mean, he has this massive underdog story where he, along with Casey, ends up winning 5 elimination challenges, and in the end game, he flips over Tina and Kenny, and they essentially run the last couple of rounds. So again, I really enjoyed this story. The cast as a whole, though, is pretty hit or miss from both sides. I mean, the vets obviously have standouts like Wes and Tina. Theo seemed like he could have been a great character, but he wasn't given that much screen time. You had some solid characters from the fresh meat, people like Kenny and Evan, who were fantastic characters, though obviously I do know about what happens with them later on in the show, which isn't particularly great, but as TV characters on this season, they were 2 of the better fresh meat. Casey had her moments. Even Lynette, who is someone that, from what I understand, has never appeared on the challenge ever again, I thought she was pretty fun as well. Diem obviously has a fantastic storyline in this and the next season where she reveals that she has cancer, and I think this made for great TV, but also is just equally depressing in the fact that she ended up losing her battle of cancer years down the road. Also, from what I understand, Evelyn, who was like the first boot of this season, ends up playing a major role in future seasons of the series. That was kind of a strange revelation I found out, but outside of them, again, like, there's just some pretty big non-factors on this season. I mean, people like Shonda, Melinda, Danny, Shane, they get pretty minimal screen time. Mind you, I mean, Danny was the first boot, but I come out of this season like remembering pretty much nothing about those people. And probably the most shocking to me of the non-factors are the winners of the season in Duel and Aviv, who get very minimal screen time. And that's something I really noticed with the challenge as a whole, is that there's no winner edit like there is with Survivor. But then again, I mean, to be fair, this is also 2 of the earlier seasons that had a smaller group of winners. Again, with previous seasons, they had been teams, and most seasons had 4 or more winners, which is just ridiculous. This is the first time they only had 2 winners. The next season we'll be talking about only had 1. But still, it doesn't feel like they're editing this show to have a satisfying conclusion, unlike something like Survivor, where, again, like, I know nothing about Aviv, and all I know about Duel actually comes from things outside of this season. I also didn't like the format of this season, where we had these 30-minute episodes and there was an elimination every other episode, where the first episode decides the nominees, the second episode involves a challenge that functions similar to like a veto from Big Brother, but barely played a factor, and then immediately after that we get the elimination challenge, which ended up pretty much being the same type of race over and over and over again, and that was really dull and really gave Wes an even bigger advantage every single time he went into elimination, as he already knew what was going on. Another thing I didn't love, and this goes for the challenge as a whole, is that the show's very inconsistent, where every season has different rules and formats that make it a lot less interesting of a game to me than something like Big Brother and Survivor. Some seasons are in teams, some are in duos, some are individuals. Most seasons have multiple winners. I mean, I really wish the show had a more consistent format. While I do think this season has a much better format than the seasons that came before it, it still isn't ideal. A final thing I'll talk about this season, and then really this goes for obviously a lot of the other earlier seasons as well, is I love how awkward TJ Levin is as a host. Now I know this is only his 2nd season, but he really feels like an extra roommate than an actual host. Now since I watched this block of 4 seasons, I have actually started watching more recent seasons, and in those I feel like TJ feels like an actual host there. But here it feels like he doesn't even know what's going on. And he has like no real sense of gravitas, which is just so funny. Like when he reads the results, he just like reads them out real quickly. And really, he feels so detached when he's running through the motions of the game. So really, I ended my experience with this season pretty mixed on it, but I did find a lot of potential within this show to the point where I wanted to continue watching. And with that, I moved on to the Duel. And coming into the Duel, I already knew that this was revered as one of the strongest seasons of the show. And I will say, I love this season. I mean, out of all the seasons I've finished up until this point, the Duel is my favorite. I mean, it's not perfect. It still has some of the fundamental flaws I have with the challenge, but I do feel like the season is more catered towards what I enjoy from shows like this. First off is the Duel format, I mean, which made the game individual for the first time ever, and I think they, for the most part, got it right here. The format of this season ends up being very similar to that of The Genius, one of my favorite reality shows. But a major difference is that where The Genius is filled with social strategy games, this one's obviously more filled with physical challenges. And obviously, I prefer the social strategy games over the physical challenges, but it's still not a terrible format. But something I didn't love about this format, though, was how the first nominee was decided, where instead of it just being the weakest performance in the challenge, which I think would have been a better format, again, would have mirrored The Genius, they end up instead having the winner of the challenge start a schoolyard pick, and the person left out ends up being the nominee. And I think this just gave way too much power to the previous relationships, and we again see the latest real world cast members getting targeted again, with 3 of the 4 of them being the first 3 boots of the season. And just like last time, the remaining member ends up getting to the final, this time being Svetlana, who was one of the stars of this season. But I do think that's kind of a flaw in the challenge format. Like, I know now it's like kind of looked at as like this guarantee thing that, okay, the first boot's going to be this rookie. That's kind of just like widely known. And obviously that's a consequence of you bringing back returning players every single season. But I do think that makes the first few rounds inherently kind of boring. Let's talk about the characters. Again, Svetlana was one of the stars of the season. And from what I understand, she hasn't competed since. And you could definitely tell throughout the season she was definitely not having fun. You could definitely tell that she didn't really want to be there, but didn't want to actively quit either. And yeah, like I get why she hasn't returned, especially because she's had some weird controversy around her in recent years. But I think Svetlana and her underdog arc were one of the most memorable aspects of this season. This also had the first appearance of Johnny Bananas, who I was mind blown when he was the first boot. I really was not expecting that, because again, like obviously I know Johnny Bananas now. I know he's like one of the massive figures within the series. I believe one of the winningest people in the history of the series. And to see on his first season that he's the first boot is just kind of funny. Again, supposedly this is a thing that happens, because obviously like Evelyn, again, same thing happened to her. I believe the same thing happens to Cara Maria, who I know becomes a prominent figure later on. So again, it's just weird how this is a thing on the challenge, that these like first boots end up becoming very prominent figures in future seasons. But again, like I really wasn't expecting it, because it's like I felt like Tyler, who is the person he goes up against in that first challenge, had a perfect first boot arc in that episode. So it's just so bizarre for like Johnny Bananas to get sniped out of the game right there. This was also my introduction to Beth, who is an insane character. And now, having watched seasons 10 and 11, I obviously know a lot more of the context behind why everyone hates her on this season. But she was fun there. Anise is also on this season, who has competed a lot more recently in the challenge history. And between watching her here and watching her in Double Agents, it just feels like a completely different person. However, just like Fresh Meat, I did find the winners of this season, again, pretty underwhelming based on the edit, where we do have Wes and Jody, despite winning, getting almost no setup to their actual wins. Again, I love Wes as a character. He was great TV on Fresh Meat, but he's more of a side character during most of this season. I mean, in many ways, this did actually feel like a sequel season to Fresh Meat, though, with a lot of Fresh Meat competitors returning here and us getting continuations of their storylines. And I feel like Wes's storyline is more satisfying if you get the context of how his run went last time, but overall, within this individual season, it didn't really do much for me. Diem's storyline in this season is a major one, and we get to see the start of her relationship with CT. And her storyline with her like taking off her wig and everything is one of the more memorable moments of the season. But yeah, I mean, as I said, the season was my introduction to CT as a TV character, and I knew he was a big name in the history of the show. I know he's someone that still competes, but I hadn't actually seen him. Yeah, and I haven't seen him literally. Like, I've never seen a picture of this person. But seeing him on this season, I mean, he was a very, very impressive competitor. And from my understanding, he's still an impressive competitor. Though in this season, he does feel like a massive hothead. And his elimination is really another standout moment for the season, where he gets DQ'd, immediately following that, he gets into this massive argument with Wes. And that was all really fun. The Evan elimination, I thought, was also a really, really interesting sequence, with Evan getting pissed at Wes for no real good reason, but that was interesting. And really, just this endgame stretch of this season is really, really strong. One of my biggest complaints about this season, though, is the elimination challenges, which all felt pretty anticlimactic to me. I mean, we literally had a challenge that was just a bidding war over how much you can lift. And this is really, really lame. And it took out some of the bigger names of the season. I mean, it took out Johnny Bananas, Nehemiah, Diem, Anissa. Again, these were all really interesting matchups that could have been really great TV, but then they just kind of go out on a whimper. But overall, this was a really strong season of the show. Some really memorable moments and really interesting gameplay. And initially, I was actually going to make this video at this point, after I finished watching those 2 seasons. However, obviously with the knowledge that the Inferno II is on Netflix, that is when I made the decision, okay, let's go back and watch seasons 10 and 11 and talk about those in this video as well. So let's talk about the Inferno II, season 10, which was the next season I watched. Again, it's on Netflix, so really easy to access. And this was my introduction to the team format, which I really, really hate. I mean, I'm okay with it throughout the season. Like, I'm okay with like putting these people in teams, having eliminations within teams, like that sort of things, whatever. The fact that they win as a team is the biggest issue for me. Again, it just makes the ending of the season really anticlimactic, which, I mean, to be fair, this is something I haven't mentioned. The ending of all these seasons have been very anticlimactic. I mean, yes, I've mentioned that, like, okay, the winners don't get winners, but also, like, I just find these final challenges really boring. And for me, the most interesting aspect of the challenge is the relationships between the characters and them trying to figure out the rules of the game, and obviously the really dumb drama that stems from all of this. But I feel like with the final challenge, it's just them doing a challenge, and usually it's some sort of race, and it's just kind of boring. And it just feels kind of dumb when you have multiple winners. I mean, we'll talk about the Gauntlet too, but that season has 9 winners, which is ridiculous. For me, obviously, having 1 winner is ideal. 1 of each sex, not terrible either, but when we get beyond that, it really feels ridiculous to me. Beyond that, I also didn't like how the nominees were chosen here. So at first, we get a team challenge, and you would think, okay, the winning team would be safe, would be immune from being eliminated, but no, this team challenge really means nothing outside of adding more money to the prize pool, which is just dumb. And I really hate how no matter how the challenge played out, 1 member of each team would go into the Inferno, which is just dumb, as despite a team possibly being stronger inherently, they might still continuously lose members because their individual members aren't nearly as strong. And we kind of see that with the good guys here, who are the most cohesive team, but they get to the final with only 4 members compared to the other team's 7. I also didn't love how this affected the editing of the show as well, where so many people just get lost in the shuffle. I also didn't love the mechanics behind the life shield and how it was won by the same people over and over and over again, because that was rarely used. But I will also say that this is another season that did grow on me over time. Again, despite all the issues that I have with the season. I mean, the thing about this season is that coming into watching the challenge, the perception I had of the show was that it was going to be this cheesy and trashy show. And while through the first 2 seasons that I watched, there were moments here and there that did feel like that, it wasn't that bad to me. This season, however, was exactly what I was expecting from this show, with this really over-the-top battle arena. That's the steel cage, and that's where the Inferno challenges are taking place. We have this really over-the-top intro of the red carpet, and then the bad guys pushing the good guys out of the way, and them staring each other down the steel cage. Like, it's really dumb. We also get a lot of trashy drama throughout this season with Tanya and Robin, where like Tanya talks about having slept with Mark Long, and Beth stirs up drama between the two, and because Robin was dating Mark Long at the time, obviously irritates her. And again, this is the type of drama I was expecting from the challenge, and thankfully we didn't get those in the 2 seasons I had watched before this, but it seemed like that sort of drama was more prominent on this season. Though, I mean, all that did lead to a fun moment of Tanya dumping Beth's clothes in the pool, so that was fun. I also found it interesting to watch CT here, where again, like through the duel, like he kind of comes off as this nice guy for the most part. I mean, like he's obviously this massive hothead, but he's also someone that, like, again, he starts his relationship with Diem. That's a really good look for him. On this season, though, he's just a complete dick, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was actually his perception coming into the duel, because, again, did not have a great look here. But something I did find interesting with this season is how they did split it up between good guys and badasses, which essentially is heroes versus villains. And I thought that was a pretty compelling group division here, especially with the badasses being this really dysfunctional group, while the good guys had this really fun underdog story with them winning out in the end. And overall, this season has so many negatives for me that really do harm it, but it does have some likable figures and some really memorable moments, so I actually ended up enjoying this season as a whole, despite having so many flaws with it. And that leads us to the final season I'm going to be talking about here, and that was Season 11, The Gauntlet 2, which format-wise, I look at it as a better version of the Inferno, where the team challenges did matter here. The winning team was immune, and it did get to pit two members of the losing team against each other, and that was a lot more interesting of a format to me. But I will say that, to me, the season was marred by a mediocre cast, less interesting moments than the Inferno II, and some really unbalanced editing, largely due to the team format. I mean, I mentioned this before, but this season has 9 winners, which is just dumb. And I don't even know anything about half of the winners here. I know nothing about Evis, about Jamie, about MJ, about Susie. It's like none of these people got hardly any screen time on this season, and I literally couldn't tell you anything about them other than their appearance. I also feel like the way that the teams were split up here was really arbitrary, where we got rookies versus vets, but then the rookie team included people who had already competed in a previous season. So, like, doesn't that make the theme pointless? Now, I do think the last few rounds of the season actually were pretty interesting, where I think Alton, Akina, and Derek have really interesting storylines through the season, but a lot of that having to come from them being team captains for a lot of the season, because the way that this season played out is that when a team lost, their team captain automatically goes into the elimination battle, and then the team has to vote in and the other member to compete against them. And this did put a lot more pressure onto the team captains, so I did think because of that, their storylines were really the focal point of the season. I also think the storyline involving the cross-team alliance was pretty interesting, and also would have been kind of innovative strategy if they actually executed on it. But outside of its better format, which didn't even work that well because of the excessive amount of competitors that were left by the end of the season, was again 16 people competing in the final, which is ridiculous. And then also the actual final itself being very underwhelming, where due to the format of the teams getting to bet on 3 competitions and the vets going all in on the first challenge and losing it, that ended the final super quickly. Now, I will say that I actually like the concept of that for a final, but really it ended up playing out in the worst possible way, and to be honest, it probably wouldn't work out in a real life scenario, as I think that approach that the vets took on this season is the approach that most teams would do, especially when coming into it as an underdog. So overall, I mean, this season's probably a worse version of the Inferno II for me. Probably the worst season I've watched so far, but still not a bad season of reality television. Again, I still got some fun out of it. I mean, the beginning portions of the season were pretty dry, but I really enjoyed the back half, and I thought this season had some pretty likable figures within it. So still, not a complete waste of a season. But there we go. I mean, those are my thoughts on the first 4 seasons of The Challenge that I've watched so far. And I'm really excited to be watching The Challenge now, which is a show I've been wanting to get into for a while. Again, it was just so intimidating. I mean, this is a really intimidating show to start watching now, especially with a completionist like me that I like to watch everything. Again, my ideal scenario would have been watching this show from the start. It actually still disturbs me that I didn't do that. I mean, with all the other shows that I cover on this channel, when I first started watching them, I went all in at the beginning. Survivor. While I started watching Survivor again with Survivor Philippines, I did go back from season 1, watch that from that point forward. Same thing with BB11. When I first got back into Big Brother, I went back and started watching again from BB1 to catch back up. I mean, with The Amazing Race recently, I rewatched the entire series to get back into The Amazing Race. Like, that's just what I do. And the fact that I didn't do that with The Challenge does kind of irritate me in a way. But really, with the scale of the series, I feel like that was the approach that I had to take. Now, I won't be making videos like this for every season I watch, but I just thought it would be interesting to talk about the earlier seasons that start off my journey here. Now, I actually have already caught up with Double Agents at the time of this recording, and you can expect a review of that season when the season finishes. And I also decided at this point that I'm actually going to be watching the show in reverse order, which might be a bit of a bizarre way to watch the show, but to be honest, I'm already spoiled on a good chunk of the show, and with the more recent seasons being a lot more accessible for me right now, plus also me wanting to get some context for Double Agents with the players that are on there, I decided, you know what, let's just go in reverse order. So that's the approach I've been taking since I watched these first 4 seasons. But yeah, this is the start of my challenge content for this channel. Definitely would like to do more down the line. I plan on covering the show just like I would with shows like The Circle, The Amazing Race. I mean, videos like this won't be nearly as often as something like Survivor or Big Brother, but I do feel pretty confident at this point that this will be a show that I continue to follow from this point forward. Now, once I catch up with the entire series, you can definitely expect a season ranking down the road, but do not expect that anytime soon. I don't know when that'll come, especially considering how long some of these more recent seasons are. Watching through them all is really just going to take forever, but it's still a fun process nonetheless. But for now, that's the start of my challenge coverage on this channel. Thank you for watching.